Welcome to the Kiltartan Gregory Museum, here at the renowned Kiltartan Cross in South Galway. I'm Rena McAllen, founding member and curator at the museum. This year we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the official opening of Kiltartan Gregory Museum by then President Mary Robinson in 1996. To mark this important milestone, we have been bringing you a series of online lectures over the past number of weeks. It is my pleasure to introduce Margaret Farrell, who is delivering the third lecture in the series titled Lady Gregory and Her Family Connections. Margaret is a great-grandniece of Lady Gregory and great-granddaughter of Frank Persse, architect of this building, which was built as the Kiltartan National School in 1892, but now houses the museum. Margaret's lecture deals with Lady Gregory and her life in Coole, her relationship with other family members, and in particular with her younger brother, Frank. We hear stories about Hugh Lane, visitors to Coole House, and visits to the Abbey Theatre. We are most grateful to Margaret Farrell, a great friend to us here at Kiltartan Cross, for bringing us this lecture. We hope you enjoy it. Goramira Mahagwev, Galer.
As a great-grandniece of Lady Gregory, I was truly honoured to have been asked by the Lady Gregory Yeats Autumn Gathering in 2014 to represent the family at the opening of the gathering that year. Isabella Augusta Persse, later to become Lady Gregory, was 2 years old when her brother Frank, my great-grandfather, was born. They were both born into a life of great privilege at Roxburgh, County Galway in the mid-1800s. Their father Dudley married twice, first to Catherine O'Grady, daughter of Standish O'Grady, the first Viscount Gillimore, and Dudley and Catherine had 3 children. Then, following Catherine's early death, he married Viscount Gillimore's niece, Frances Barry, from Castle Core in County Cork. Together he and Frances had 13 more children at Roxburgh, including, to name just a few of them, Augusta, Lady Gregory, Adelaide, mother of Hugh Lane, Elizabeth, mother of John and Frank Shaw Taylor, Henry, grandfather of Richard Persse, a frequent visitor to the annual gathering, and Frank, my great-grandfather on my father's side of my family. So I am Lady Gregory's great-niece through my late father, Ben Farrell. Augusta and Frank were close in many ways, with parallels between their lives. Augusta was born in March 1852, Frank in April 1854. Frank died in 1928, aged 74, and Augusta died 4 years later in 1932, aged 80. They both grew up together at Roxburgh, both married locally, and both lived most of their lives within a few miles of each other here in County Galway. In fact, they both married within a few months of each other in 1880. He, aged 26, to Mary Monaghan from Temple Martin in County Galway. Augusta, aged 28, married Sir William Gregory, who was considerably older than her. So while their mother Frances, herself widowed 2 years earlier, was surely delighted that her least attractive daughter had finally found a husband, she must have fretted that year that her 7 notoriously wild sons might disgrace both families locally with the summer of celebrations for both pairs of newlyweds. Coole Park was loved as much by Augusta and Frank's family, the Perses, as it was by the Gregorys. One can imagine that following Sir William's death, Lady Gregory must have despaired at the thought of taking on thousands of acres of land, the tenants, the woods, the gardens, and of course the house itself. But she was taking it on behalf of her son Robert for a time when he would come of age and take over the estate. This, as we know, was not to be. But Lady Gregory rose to the challenge. Although she was very much at the helm of managing the house and the estate, Frank was also very involved, acting as her land agent and advisor over the decades, right up until the sale of Coole to the Irish state in 1926. She in turn was a great support to him, particularly in later years when life became insecure for them. In Lady Gregory's journals, she records Frank's funeral in Crockwell in 1928, following his unexpected death. She remembers her young brother with fondness, describing him as a kind boy with a dancing light in his eye. She recalls him as a young boy riding his horse Twilight along the country roads with the Galway blazers, having lost his hat, with his fair hair shining. And as they passed, the master of the foxhounds, Frank Persse, shouted out to the young Augusta, "Tell your mother I'm prouder of Frank than if he wrote the Bible." She goes on to say, the dancing light in his eyes had never gone out, was, like his kindness, still unquenched. As well as being Justice of the Peace, Frank worked as both an engineer and an architect in Galway. When he was 18, he went up to Trinity College Dublin, graduating in 1875. From there, he did a 4-year apprenticeship in Liverpool in engineering, returning to work as a buildings inspector in Galway with the Board of Works. In fact, during his time at Trinity, he often tried to match Augusta with his delightful university friends, but to no avail. Fortunately, she met Sir William, whom she adored, and who was, by all accounts, a fascinating man. Perhaps because of the influence of Sir William, who had travelled widely and had been a politician as well as a governor of Ceylon, Frank decided to tap into his artistic talents and train to be an architect. The house at Coole was always a place of learning and of culture. It was a place stuffed with paintings, sculptures, maps, antiques and artefacts from around the world, and books about art, other cultures, politics, history, architecture, wildlife, trees, gardens and nature. Just as Coole Park later influenced Yeats, Synge, Edward Martyn and all the architects of Ireland's cultural renaissance, so too did it influence and inspire Lady Gregory's siblings and cousins who had access to Sir William's unique home. By the time Frank decided to embark on his career as an architect, he and Mary had 4 children. The eldest daughter, May, was grandmother to the late Geoffrey O'Byrne White, who was a great supporter and friend of this annual gathering and, of course, the Kiltartan Gregory Museum. They later had 2 more children, the youngest of which was Mildred Rosamond, my grandmother. When the 4 older children were young, Frank had trained as an architect in London, and in 1889 he had returned to set up practice in Loughrea. He was kept busy with municipal as well as private projects over the years. These included works to Monivea Castle and Church, the extraordinary mausoleum for the Frenches at Monivea, and of course this building, the Kiltartan National School, the design of which was influenced by the architecture of Ceylon, which the Gregorys had recently visited. This is now the Kiltartan Gregory Museum, which, like other buildings, features and attractions on the Lady Gregory Yeats Trail, is cared for and preserved for future generations, thanks again to the tremendous efforts of visionaries and volunteers, past and present, who do so much to protect and promote our unique heritage, which is of course vital for Irish tourism. Like the unique annual literary gatherings at Coole Park and the people behind it, we are indebted to them for keeping the memories of Coole alive. So Mildred, my grandmother, also known as Millie, and to some Aunt Pinny, together with her siblings, adored the County Galway countryside. They loved everything about it, the places and the people. They were a very tight-knit family, all very close to each other, and the various cousins living nearby. They recounted stories of spying on Yeats at Coole, watching him muttering to himself, and when he would spot the children, he would assume a dramatic pose, as if he were observing something interesting in the distance. The younger generation certainly viewed Yeats as the least favourite of Lady Gregory's friends. Maybe they were echoing the views of older relatives who perhaps envied all the attention that she lavished on him. But the Perses may have been well able to judge a good sports horse, but Augusta could judge pure poetic genius. On one occasion, My grandmother was dragged along to a soiree at Cool House, aged probably 7 or 8, and she was asked to perform her party piece in front of the guests. So she took out her violin from its case and started to play what she thought was a masterpiece. But on hearing her clumsy squeaks, the guests roared with laughter and poor Granny ran crying from the room. She singled out Yeats as being particularly mean. But as she grew older, and indeed throughout her life, our grandmother was fiercely proud of her family history and always admired and promoted all that she felt Lady Gregory and indeed Hugh Lane had achieved, as well as the importance of Cool nationally. She was devastated when the house was pulled down. In fact, she and indeed Ruth Shine, Hugh Lane's sister, both contributed a great deal to the first biography of Lady Gregory by Elizabeth Coxhead. It meant a great deal to my grandmother that Lady Gregory's story was told and that she was not erased from Irish history. My parents always said that they wished they'd been able to record everything our grandmother said, impossible in the 1960s and early 70s. She had been a witness to so much. She was born in 1893 and throughout her childhood would have observed all the comings and goings at Cool. She loved the outdoor pursuits it offered, hunting and fishing, and probably cricket with the boys too. But for me, the most fascinating time for our grandmother must have been at the Abbey Theatre in January 1907, during the Playboy of the Western World riots. Although she was only 13 years old, my grandmother was there, helping out her Aunt Augusta as she often did. I'm sure Lady Gregory, Singh and so on expected controversy and probably needed all the help they could get. Of course, there must have been great excitement too, and lots of the family would have been there giving moral support. Granny would have witnessed all the action. Lady Gregory encouraging Molly Allgood and the actors to keep on going despite the protests. She would have witnessed poor Singh, pale and speechless, as the rioters shouted, "Kill the author!" And I'm sure she would have given a helping hand, if asked of course, to control the angry mob. My grandmother was very strong, mad about ponies. She'd been hunting from an early age, probably 3 or 4, and she was absolutely fearless. So she would have been a great help in the theatre. I can just imagine her encouraging Hugh Lane, he too a great horse person, to get out there and physically remove the troublemakers from the aisles. On one very rowdy evening that week at the Abbey in 1907, when Yeats was there, I think, there was a group of boisterous medical students from University College Dublin, and they were behaving very badly and subsequently arrested for drunken, disorderly behaviour and rioting. Little did my granny know at the time that there, among the troublemaking medical students, was her future husband, Dr. Bertie Farrell, my grandfather. So now, well over a century since the Playboy riots, I have no doubt that if they were all alive today, my grandmother, my great-grandfather, his wife, and all the cousins, and all those witnesses to Lady Gregory's gatherings at Cool Park, they would, without doubt, be utterly delighted and thrilled to see that Cool Park is still so open, so alive, and so welcoming, that Thurbally is once again open and in safe hands, and indeed that this unique museum here, at this very special place in Kiltartan Cross, is thriving. So thank you so much to Rena and Sister Dolores and everybody here at the museum for inviting me along to contribute, and I wish everybody all the very best for the next 25 years at the Kiltartan Gregory Museum. Thank you and goodbye.